Hello, I'm Susan Green, Associate Curator of Special Collections, Archives, and Research at the Philbrook Museum of Art. And I am so glad you've joined me today for Curators at Home. And last time we looked at Wade Phillips's bedroom, and so this time I thought we would look at Genevieve Phillips's bedroom. So let me pull up the images. And first I want to introduce you to Genevieve Phillips. So Genevieve Phillips was born in Iowa and moved to Oklahoma to be with her new husband, Wade Phillips. They lived multiple places, Bartlesville, Okmulgee, they lived in Tulsa, and in 1925, they sold the Wade Phillips Oil Company, his business, and they were able to build their dream home. So this image from the left, on the left is Genevieve Phillips from about 1926. So right after they sold the company and as they were designing, imagining their home, you can see that she's elegant, she's poised, she definitely had fashion sense. And then on the right, this is an image just from a few years later, from probably the late 20s to early to mid 30s. So the image on the left, she's in her late 30s, and the image on the right, she's in her 40s. And she again is poised and elegant. She really cared for her friends. She cared for her family. She was not, from what we understand, an exuberant person. We don't have a lot of writing or records about her, but the stories we have from friends and family are about a woman who truly cared for the other people around her. And I think she also cared for her home. So Philbrook. She also had quite a little bit of an adventurous spirit. In 1926, so the image on the left, the family travels to Europe. And in a couple of images that I have that I will share with, here we go. The image in the middle is a receipt from Florence from 1926. So they traveled to Italy, they traveled to Spain and France, they traveled around Europe, and she started buying things, knowing that she needed to furnish Villa Philbrook. And I love this idea of going into the shops in Florence or Paris or Madrid, wherever they were, with her eye, gathering the objects that she wanted. A lot of the things that they bought in Italy included furniture, but it also included textiles. And this receipt is for objects as yet unidentified, but you can see all of the notes, the scrawls, as they're figuring out how many lira different objects would cost, but they are all to go to Mrs. Phillips. And then the image on the right is from just a couple of years later, from 1928. And this really kind of modest letter hides the story of Genevieve Phillips traveling to Cuba on her own, exploring the island, and going into an antique shop where she found, among other things, some of the armor that's on display at Philbrook in our great hall and in the stairway down to get down to the basement. So I love imagining her traveling the world, finding these things that she could use in her home. So let's see her beloved Villa Philbrook. So here's the, let's see, it's the east side of Villa Philbrook, so it faces the east, faces into the gardens. This photo is probably from about 1928 to 30, somewhere in there. The gardens have grown quite a bit. And Genevieve Phillips's bedroom is on the top level on the left side of your screen. So there's a couple of branches that are obscuring the windows just a little bit, but that's Genevieve's window. And so Wade and their son Elliot had rooms on the front of the house. Genevieve and Helen Jane, along with some guest rooms, had rooms on the garden side of the house. So they also shared a balcony. So you can see the balcony, it has some awnings. So Genevieve and Helen Jane could go out onto the balcony, enjoy the sun, enjoy the breeze, first thing in the morning, maybe have a cup of coffee, maybe read the paper, and maybe it's the afternoon and you're wanting to hear the birds. So I love imagining them out on the balcony. So let's see what the inside of the room looks like. Well, first, we got to compare it with Mr. Phillips's bedroom. So remember, Mr. Phillips's bedroom is across the hall. They had separate bedrooms, but they also shared a sleeping space. But this is Mr. Phillips's bedroom. It's kind of all rectilinear angles. It's a little heavier. It's still very comfortable, but it is inspired by Spain. And instead, Mrs. Phillips's bedroom is all curves and swoops and satin and silk. It's all about this soft touch. So I love this comparison. A little more rectilinear and maybe a little plainer and a little more elegant and opulent for Mrs. Phillips. So let's look at the big picture. So I should say it's all soft except maybe those teeth in the polar bear skin. So there is in many of the bedrooms, there is some sort of a fur on the floor. And Mrs. Phillips, because it is this lighter color, has a polar bear rug. He's quite grimacing, but I think it would have, again, it's about the texture. So what it would feel like to step onto the rug. But the colors are lighter. The walls are a light color. The drapery are a lovely lighter blue, silk taffeta with slight embroidery, light embroidery with kind of pinks and yellows, a little bit of green. So these lovely spring colors. And I think that's so appropriate as the bedroom faces out onto the garden. So the garden comes into the room itself. The room is decorated in, again, sort of swags and swoops. The molding and the architectural elements are looking towards France instead of Spain and Italy, like many of the rooms on the main level and like Mr. Phillips's bedroom are. This bedroom is looking towards France. So we have the swags, we have the plaster ornamentation of France. And this would be inspired by Louis XV and Louis XVI, so in the 1700s. If you look at the furniture, some of it is antique, but some of it is contemporary to the time, so built in 1926 and 27. But you can still see it has those kind of curves of Louis XV furniture, the cabriole legs. And if we look this direction, you can see a dressing table. You can see the upholstery on the furniture, how it's again embroidered with or includes a pattern of flowers and kind of again thinking about the garden. This door, so on the long wall, there is a sort of a window space. It's covered in a drape. That's actually a door. So that's the door to go out onto the balcony. And then you see the bed, and the bed is actually in the list, the inventory list from when they built the house. It's called a day bed. And remember, they did have these separate rooms and then a shared sleeping space. And so this perhaps was more for naps and for resting during the day, for reading. So it's a small day bed, but it's draped in this absolutely gorgeous silk or satin coverlet. But if you look really closely at the bed and what's under the bed, it is super elegant. It is so elegant that it's up on a platform. So can you imagine having your bedroom and your bed is on a platform? So a small bed, but still it's raised up just a little bit. So I love that little touch, that great touch. So then we look around, kind of around the corner. Now we're looking towards the west side of the room. You can see that there are these different pieces of furniture. So there's the dressing table, there's sort of a kidney-shaped writing table, and then a bureau. But actually, this isn't the place that Mrs. Phillips would have gotten dressed in the morning. So there's a set of stairs over in the corner of the room. You can see the hand railing behind the chaise longue. So there's a set of stairs. And if we show you our next image pair, you can see this even clearly, the stairs going up. They go into a smaller space, and that is the dressing room. So Mrs. Phillips's dressing room, her closet, and then her bath. And that's the space that then adjoins with the shared sleeping space. Unfortunately, while the Phillipses took photographs or hired a photographer to take different photographs of the home. They didn't take photographs of the bathrooms or the closets. This is really one of only a couple of images that show kind of the behind the scenes aspect of the house. So I love this image for that reason of the dressing room, but I also love the image for another reason, and that is because the photographer is captured. So this is almost a self-portrait. The room was small. It would be hard to kind of get yourself and one of the big box cameras into the space because it was a box camera on a tripod, and there's so many mirrors. He had to really work not to be in the image, but he still is captured in this image. You can see him in the dressing table mirror, and he's wearing a starched white shirt, probably a tie, very dapper, and taking these photographs of the Villa Philbrook. So that is what Mrs. Phillips's rooms looked like when they lived there. Of course, in 1938, they decided to give the home away, and it was extensively remodeled to open in 1939. This space, it became a period room. And so here's our images from when we were first a museum. This is in the early 40s on the left. And the room was modified. We again didn't have a huge art collection. That was developed over decades. And so this became a period room, and it worked so perfectly as a French room. They made modifications, but it became a French room. And this image on the right is from the 60s. And you can see the details of the room. I also really like this image because it answers a question for us. So sometimes, occasionally, I'll hear a visitor say, well, I understood that Mrs. Phillips played the harp. And the understanding that we have from the family, including Elliot Phillips, who said that no one in the family really, while they loved music, no one could really play an instrument with proficiency, but they had an organ, they had a piano, they loved music, they had multiple radios and a phonograph, but there are people who have this adamant understanding that Mrs. Phillips played the harp, and I think this image explains why that kind of misunderstanding happened. So this was Mrs. Phillips's room, which had a French style. It was remodeled to be the French room, and in, I think, the 50s, maybe, they purchased a harp to go in the room as a setting the stage kind of this French salon. And therefore, this understanding happened that Mrs. Phillips then must have played the harp. But from everything we understand from the family, she did not play the harp. But it's a beautiful harp, and it's a beautiful room. One thing we do know is that or we understand at least, is that Mrs. Phillips did really love her bedroom. And as they were remodeling Villa Philbrook to become a museum, they did, as I've mentioned before, knock down walls, open up closets, open up bathrooms, because they wanted it to be a space, not a house museum, but a community space, a space where people could come together to see art. And we think that Mrs. Phillips really loved her room, and she actually removed elements from the room and took them with her. And they were building their apartment in the Philcade penthouse. So here's a good example of how they changed this space. So this is, on the left, it's a snippet of a photograph from when it was Mrs. Phillips's room, and on the right, it's when it was the French room. And you can see major differences. We've talked about mantles several times, and so here's another example. The Phillips family removed Mrs. Phillips's more neoclassical mantle, and they installed a faux painted but beautifully carved, more Rococo, Louis XV with those cabriole S curves mantle to really highlight the sense that this should be a French room. So you get that almost that opulent feel of France with this faux marble mantle. They also, though, removed some of the plaster work and the trim, and actually completely redid all of the trim in the room, except perhaps the crown molding around the top. And Cooper and Gentiluomo, the artists who painted the ceilings in the Great Hall, they painted this little medallion that's a pair of angels, or Cupid, and that may also possibly have gone to the Philcade Penthouse. We don't know. And if anyone has a connection with the Philcade, I would love to visit the Philcade and see if some of these elements are still there, see if the mantle is still there, see if any of this trim is still there. That would be a wonderful exploration. But when it became the French Room, it was changed and moved and molded. So the Villa Philbrook has never stayed the same. It has changed over our entire history, and it looks very different today. So here is Villa Philbrook's gallery today. It is in the 80s and 90s, it changed from being the French Room. It had Chinese tradeware, it had other objects in it, and it had a complete remodel. So we have spaces we can hang large artwork in this room, and this houses actually some of our very favorite, some of our most beloved modern and contemporary pieces. So on in the left image, we have two amazing figural images, one by Milton Avery and one by Fritz Scholder. You can see the door out to the balcony. Then there's this fantastic trompe l'oeil cut out by artist Otto Decker. This is Roberta. She is always at work. She never stops working. She has such an amazing work ethic. So here she is working in the gallery. And then this kind of neo-abstraction by Paul Jenkins. But what I really want to look at is the image on the right. And this is a work by Louise Lawler, Harry Fonseca in the middle, and Theaster Gates. And so if we start by looking at the Harry Fonseca, the purple and the orange, Harry Fonseca is a Native American artist, and you may know his work because of his Coyote series, these trickster figures, and we have a couple in the Philbrook collection. But this beautiful abstraction is from his Canyon series. So you see these almost striations of the geologic layers in a canyon, seeing how the earth is formed and how it's revealed in a canyon. But then it also possibly could be a tapestry or a rug, threads woven together to make this beautiful pattern. And we have the oranges and the yellows and the purples, all of these colors coming together in this really vibrant, warming image. And then to its right is a work by Theaster Gates. And at first you look at it and you see these kind of strips of almost a heavy vinyl fabric. It's all lined up in this horizontal canvas, and you see the ripples on these strips. There's this ripples and this movement, this rhythm to the work. And as you look closer, you see the rhythm in the color. So the color changes, modulates across each of these strips. And there's some of the strips have writing on them. And so when you look at the label, you realize that these are decommissioned water hoses, fire hoses. And Theaster Gates is thinking about the time when protesters, demonstrators, people who are working for civil rights, human rights, were blasted by people that are supposed to be on their own side, by the police, perhaps by the military, from their own country. And not given that right to speak up for those around us, for civil rights and for human rights. And so thinking about how it has this larger meaning with the beauty of the object at the same time. And then on the left is a piece by artist Louise Lawler, and she has, this is a photograph that's kind of a skewed angle of a Mondrian. So again, we have these kind of this formal quality of these shapes or stripes or colors. But Louise Lawler's actually thinking about the commodification of art, the transport of art, the life of a work of art, how it goes from artist to dealer to auction house to owner, and where it really lives, and its entire surroundings in this commodification of art. And so I love that all three of these works together share sort of similar formal qualities, but they are doing such different things. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about going into a gallery, going into a space with contemporary works of art, is exploring all of these ideas that the artists are working with. And so with that, I will leave you for today, but that's our exploration of Mrs. Phillips, Genevieve Phillips's bedroom. I appreciate you joining me today, and I look forward to being with you again next week when we'll do another session of Curators at Home. Thanks so much. Stay safe and stay healthy.